This Film is Lit, the podcast where we finally settle the score on one simple question. Is the book really better than the movie? I'm Bryan, and I have a film degree, so I watch the movie, but don't read the book.
And I'm Katie. I have an English degree, so I do things the right way and read the book before we watch the movie.
So prepare to be wowed by our expertise and charm as we dissect all of your favorite film adaptations and decide if the silver screen or the written word did it better. So turn it up, settle in, and get ready for spoilers, because this film is lit. It's the year 2054, and murder is a thing of the past. But at what cost? It's Minority Report, and this film is lit. Hello guys, gals, non-binary, and everybody else, and welcome back to This Film is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. It is the 41st episode. It is Minority Report, and we are joined for the first time ever by a full-on guest host. Call-in guest host. We've had in-studio guest hosts before. But we're joined by Aaron Rabi of the Embrace the Void and Philosophers in Space podcast. Aaron, how you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on. It's fun.
Yeah, no problem. Well, I'm a big fan of both of your main podcasts that you're on, which is why we reached out to you. You have done 2 episodes on Minority Report on your show. Why don't you give us a little background on kind of what you do and what you do on Philosophers in Space specifically, and what you do in your day job and why you're qualified to speak about these sort of things.
Sure. So on Philosophers in Space, we take a piece of sci-fi every week, or sometimes we'll take one piece and do a couple episodes on it if it's really hefty, like Dune or something. And if it's something that I really like, then we'll talk about it for several episodes.
Like Dune, when you do 8 episodes on it, yeah.
And then we'll connect it to a specific philosophical topic of some sort, ranging through all the different kind of fields of philosophy. And we usually try to go for things that are it's all about making it accessible, right? Making philosophy not feel like something that's a sort of weird, separate academic topic, but realizing that like we're all kind of soaking in it all the time. So,
yes.
And the reason I do this is because I teach philosophy, primarily ethics, at Rutgers University. And I am really into science fiction. I was raised on all these kind of movies and stories and stuff, so it's a nice marriage of all the things that I really find interesting, and it turns out there's a couple other people who also like it. Yes,
like I said, I'm a big fan. I listen to every episode. It's been a while since I listened to the Minority Report episodes, because they were a while ago on the Patreon feed. But yeah, I'm a big fan. Speaking of your Patreon feed, I wanted to plug one other thing specifically. We have a lot of fans on this show that cross over from my YouTube channel that I do called Good, Bad, or Bad, and we did one of our first few episodes. We covered Battlefield Earth, and you guys recently dove into that head first on your Patreon feed.
Yep.
And it was a blast, I'll say.
We went full rat brain. We did.
Full manimal.
Full
manimal on 'em.
Animal. No, they never say manimal. You'd think they'd say manimal, but no.
Yeah, that was one of the first comments watching that film. I was like, how do they never once in this entire script? I felt like in the first pass they had manimal written, and they're like, that's a little too silly. We need to split that up. But yeah, it's a great episode. So if you enjoy Philosophers in Space, I would definitely recommend subscribing or supporting them on Patreon and checking out their Battlefield Earth breakdown.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to get into our first main segment here for the episode, which is Let Me Sum Up.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
All right, so to start this segment out, I usually give a summary of the book, or in this case, short story. I try to get all of the relevant information in there so that people can understand the ways that it differs from the movie.
If they haven't read or seen either thing, it's kind of a background.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In this case, I feel like my summary ended up almost as long as the story.
Yeah, that's fair.
All right, go ahead, Katie. I'm going to plug my ears so I don't get too many things spoiled. Is there any spoilers in here? That's a problem for me?
Yeah,
all
probably.
Right, I'm going to plug my ears and hum like normal. All right.
John Anderton is the head of Pre-Crime, a future police department that heads off all crime through the use of precogs, mutants that can see 2 weeks into the future. Anderton's world is turned upside down when the precogs predict that he will murder a man he's never heard of, Leopold Kaplan. Now on the run and suspicious of everyone, including his wife, Anderton risks his life to get a hold of the Minority Report, the one precog report out of 3 that did not predict his crime. Through twists and turns and shifting alliances, Anderton slowly comes to understand what happened and realizes that in order to keep the army from consolidating police power, he must make sure the premonition comes to pass.
All right, I'm going to briefly summarize the film here. John Anderton is the premier detective and maybe chief of the Washington, D.C. pre-crime unit. Pre-crime has been rolled out in D.C. as a test with plans to take it nationwide very soon. Things go awry when Anderton starts delving into an old prevented quote-unquote murder. Shortly after that, his name shows up as a future murderer, and John has to run. Boy, does he. Ultimately, John discovers that the murder he was going to commit was orchestrated by the creator of pre-crime, Burgess, and the old prevented murder he was investigating wasn't actually prevented. It was carried out by Burgess himself to stop the main precog, Agatha's mother, from taking her back, thus ruining pre-crime, or ending pre-crime, because she's kind of the key to the whole thing. Anderton exposes this secret to the world, puts Burgess between a rock and a hard place, ultimately resulting in Burgess committing suicide and pre-crime being shut down. So that's kind of the movie in a nutshell for people who haven't watched it. Oh, by the way, spoilers in case.
Why Max von Sydow? Why?
Right. We were talking about in the prequel, too, that originally at one point was going to be played by Ian McKellen, which I thought would have been pretty great, too.
Interesting.
Yeah.
There was a version with him, Matt Damon, I believe, or there was a whole different cast of, but it was like Tom Cruise was still Anderton, but every other main character was somebody wildly different, but kind of similar, and it would have been an interesting take on it. So there we go. That's our summary. Let's get into our game show portion of the episode, which is Guess Who?
Who are you?
No one of consequence.
I must know.
Get used to disappointment.
Okay.
So premise for this, for our listeners and anybody else who's coming over maybe from Aaron's podcast, I have not read the book. I probably should have stated that again at the beginning. It's in our intro. But I have not read the book or the short story that this is adapted from, so I don't know. I'm kind of going off only the movie. And so they're going to read character descriptions. I'm going to try to guess which character from the film this description is describing. So go ahead, Katie.
All right. I'm getting bald and fat and old.
Max von Sydow. He's not fat, though. Okay, sorry, continue.
That's it.
That's it?
That's it.
Bald and fat and old.
Yes.
Here's what I'm going to do, though. I think I have a guess on this, but I'm doing it because I'm delving into my memory from our 5th episode where we did Blade Runner. Uh-huh. And the main character in that one, Deckard, is also bald, fat, and old in the short story, I believe, whereas Harrison Ford is very much not. So I'm going to think that maybe it's a similar idea here where it's Anderton and like it was Deckard in Blade Runner, and they kind of sexed him up and let Tom Cruise play him. I'm going to go with Anderton for that one.
So that's your final answer?
That's my final answer.
It is Anderton.
Boom.
And they did sex him up.
That's some pretty good Philip K. Dick pre-criming you did right there. That was
Yeah. Well, like I said, I remember that specifically from the Blade Runner episode we did where it was, I remember...
Yeah, go ahead. No, I was going to say, I mean, this is the same problem in Total Recall with Schwarzenegger, right? One of the biggest issues with Philip K. Dick adaptations is all Philip K. Dick leads are kind of schlubby everymans, and all Philip K. Dick lead actors in movies are Tom Cruise-like people.
Yeah.
Action movie stars.
Keanu Reeves, it's just, Nicolas Cage.
Yep. So I remembered that, and I'm glad I was able to store that away in my memory banks because that helped me go 1 for 1. All right, Aaron, hit me with the second one.
All right. The look on his blonde, overly confident face showed that he considered the matter settled. What was actually going on in that close-cropped skull? The young man's eyes were blue, bright, and disturbingly clever.
Blonde hair. There's like nobody with blonde hair in this movie other than like maybe a precog. Agatha kind of has blonde hair.
There's this guy on the team. What's his name? That actor who I really like.
Oh yeah. The guy he says you don't have to run, John, or whatever. Yeah, that guy. I can't remember his name.
I could never remember, but I always remember his face.
Yeah, his partner or whatever.
I just called him Beefcake in my head the whole time.
Beefcake? That's pretty good. He is a bit of a beefcake.
He is.
And he does have piercing blue eyes. That character does, or that actor does have pretty piercing blue eyes, which was part of this description. But this makes me think that this is but just based on it being the second description, because Katie's not always the best at hiding the order of these based on when characters are introduced.
Wow.
I'm thinking this may be sorry. Mommy and Daddy are fighting. This may be Colin Farrell's character, who I think is in the book, if I remember. I also, slight spoilers, since I did listen to the Philosophers in Space episodes on this, I did get a little bit of background knowledge from the short story. So I'm cheating a little. But I can't remember his name now, but I'm going to say Colin Farrell's character.
Final answer?
Yes, final answer.
That is correct. Whitwer.
Whitwer, that's it. Yes, Whitwer.
We should have clearly wiped your memory before we did this episode.
Yeah, they really,
We've not
really
Phyllis K. Dicked this properly.
No. You just plain old dicked it, apparently. Yeah.
All right.
Third one. I'm 2 for 2, though. I'm crushing this.
You are. His pale eyes flickered slightly as they rested on a brown-haired woman in her trim police uniform.
Oh, it's a brown-haired woman in a police uniform. Because the only female characters in this movie are Agatha and his wife, or ex-wife at this point. And she is brown-haired.
There is a female police member.
Is there?
There?
There might be, but she's not a major character.
No. I'm misremembering.
Because, like, the main police guys, other than Anderton, are the guy who sits at the computer and, like, does stuff at the end and, like, broadcasts the thing. And then the blue-eyed beefcake. And then just, like, kind of nameless other people, I feel like.
All right.
But,
there may have been a woman in that room. I'm not going to say there wasn't, but there may have been a woman in that room.
There may have been. There very well may have been.
It's another Philip K. Dick problem.
Yeah. We discussed that a bit in Blade Runner.
You start to notice that trend, yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of, like, in the police uniform is really throwing me, because I'm still going to say that it's Anderton's wife/ex-wife. Does she have a name?
She does.
I'm sure she does, but I don't know.
Her name is Lara in the movie.
Yeah.
And in the story, it's Lisa. And that is correct.
Nice. So is she a police? Well, I guess we'll get there. But she is a police officer of some sort, or pre-crime officer in the short story.
Yeah. She doesn't live in a fridge in the story.
Yeah. Fair enough. All right. Last one, Aaron. Here we go.
The man nervously slipped a pair of rimless glasses in place, snapped the case shut, and moistened his dry lips. He was elderly, perhaps 70 or older. His body was thin, wiry, his attitude curiously rigid. What little hair he had was dusty brown, a carefully smoothed sheen of neutral color about his pale, bony skull.
Well, I mean, now, I'm a little confused because from what I remember, I thought Burgess wasn't, like, a character in the book, or in the short story. But he's the only old person in the movie that's, like, a main character that matters. So I'm going to say he might be mentioned in the book, but he just might not have play as much as a role as he does in the movie is what I'm going to kind of guess. But he is still probably in it. So I'm going to say Burgess, or the founder of Pre-Crime.
Okay.
I think we should give it to him on a technicality insofar
Yeah, because I fudged it a little here to get another character description. Burgess isn't in the short story, but he has a kind of sort of equivalent.
In a very loose sense, right?
Yeah.
Right. There's another antagonist in the story who is an old guy.
Yeah.
Is he the founder of Pre-Crime?
No. But if I'm remembering right, he is the one who he plays a similar role in the orchestration of what happens to Anderton.
Are we at a point where I can spoil the plot some and clarify?
Oh, yeah, that's fine. I mean, there's things I'll ask about later, but yeah, go for it.
So in the short story, the Burgess character and the Anderton character are the same character, basically. It's just the one old guy who started Pre-Crime and gets set up by the new guy, Whitwer. There's a whole separate plot in the story that they chose not to use involving the military and, like, the military trying to take over control of policing, essentially. And so there's a military guy named Kaplan, who is the antagonist who But though you find out in the story, no one was setting anyone up. Just like no one was setting anyone up. Whereas in the movie, there's a little bit more of a direct setup occurring.
Okay, interesting, cool.
I think that's how this. I mean, like you could interpret that story maybe a couple of different ways, but I think that's my impression is that it's not. It's never actually a setup.
All right, cool. Well, that was Guess Who 4 for 4, crushing it. I cheated, but I still got all the for it. Right. So let's move on to what's that in the book?
Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone.
The what?
Honestly, don't you two read?
All right, this is the section where I, the non-reader, I mean, I do read quite a bit, but in this instance, the non-reader, I just don't want people to get the wrong impression and think I don't read at all.
You should pull the Bill Hicks sketch where he talks about reading in a Denny's one time when he's on the road, and he says that someone comes up to him and says, "Oh, well, we got ourselves a reader," because he walked into a Klan rally in a Boy George costume.
Yeah.
I'm eating, I'm alone, and I'm reading a book. Waitress walks over to me. Hey, what you reading for? Is that like the weirdest question ever? Then this trucker in the next booth gets up, stands over me and goes, "Well, looks like we got ourselves a reader."
So this section, I pick out elements from the movie that I feel like were either likely added for the film version, or maybe I think potentially were in the book and want to see if they were. I have a few things, and we're going to jump through some of them here. So, was that in the book? First off, do the crimes get displayed on highly polished wooden balls that slide down an elaborate gerbil cage, hamster cage contraption? Is that what goes on in the book, Katie?
No.
No?
They get printed on a little card.
Oh.
And the little card pops out of the machine.
Well, that's not as exciting.
It's very low-tech Philip K. Dick kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not as visually interesting, I'm sure.
Yeah. Because I loved that in the movie. I love the little balls, and it comes down and it turns. It's very dramatic, too, because the way the ball turns on the platform, revealing the name of whoever. Yeah, it's pretty good. Aaron, you had a note here about this that I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, because funny enough, I was watching The Wire, and they used the term red ball, which led me to sort of wonder what the etymology of red balls are in the criminal system. And turns out it's totally unrelated in a sense. The best one I could find is that as during a time of signaling, before radios and things, right? They would use balls on sticks to signal in different settings, like in harbors sometimes, and it became
boats and stuff.
and it became popular in trains, and especially what happened was when the trains. This is the story that I found, at least, and I'm happy to hear anyone's other stories about this, but. Trains that were carrying freight that was perishable and therefore needed to have right of way when traveling across country, high priority stuff, would get red ball signals. So red ball came to signal, a high priority, really important, get this done fast kind of thing. And then at some point that transferred over to the criminal justice system when you're talking about high priority crimes, essentially.
Yeah. The murders where you got the first 48 hours or whatever to
or murders that have caught the attention of the news, so serial killers or red balls.
Yeah.
So
or big violent crimes, that sort of thing. Okay, interesting. That was
I didn't know that was a crime term either.
Yeah, I didn't either, because we haven't watched The Wire. So.
Yeah, I didn't either until I heard them use it, and I was like, oh, Philip K. Dick didn't just make that up. Interesting.
Yeah.
Or I guess not Philip K. Dick, but Spielberg.
Spielberg, yeah, didn't just make that one up. All right, so in the short story, because in the movie there's a distinction between premeditated murders and crimes of passion, murders of passion in the moment, and that's where the red ball is a crime of passion, I think, if I remember correctly, is a crime of passion, and then it's brown if it's premeditated or vice versa. And is there that distinction in the book? Because in the movie they have sometimes just minutes to stop the crimes of passions, whereas the premeditated murders, they can have up to 4 days. Is there that distinction in the book?
I don't recall this being discussed in the short story.
Okay.
I only read it once, full disclosure. So if it is in there, Aaron, is it in there? Do you know?
It's mentioned.
Remember?
It's mentioned briefly in relation to the question of what can the precogs see. One of the other concerns you had was like, can they see all crime or just murder?
Yeah.
So in the movie, they can only see sort of murder. It seems like.
It seems like
in the short story, they claim that they've eliminated all serious crime, so it's not just murders and and there's no like distinction. Like they're just sort of all the time, kind of seeing a week or so in advance, essentially.
Gotcha. That makes sense, and that kind of plays into a sequence in the film we'll talk about here in a little bit, but because that was. I was a little confused about that, and I thought that was. I mean, it's an interesting idea in this instance. I kind of like it thematically and like dramatically in the film, having those. It makes emotional sense to you when you're watching, like, oh, a crime of passion. Yeah, they only see that when it's about to happen versus something where like I'm planning to kill this person 2 days from now. They could maybe it kind of makes sense, quote unquote. Yeah. But I'm not sure if it makes sense in a universe where these people can just predict the future.
And that said. Philip K. Dick in the short story doesn't follow through on that concept. If you think about, like, in the execution of the main crime that is the central issue of the story, the character commits a series of other crimes that, like, if they really did predict all crimes, you'd have an assault card. He could piece his way through what's going to happen to him at that point.
Yeah. So now we're going to hit a lightning round. We talked about this briefly in the prequel episode about how Steven Spielberg hired a whole panel of future researchers, basically scientists and medical researchers and architects and all kinds of stuff to create the world of Minority Report, which is one of my favorite things about the film is sort of the world building that it does very passively. But I want to get into, because I want to see if any of these elements from the film that I love are from the book, or if Steven Spielberg has created and his panel of future experts have created all of them. So this is Dick versus Spielberg, and I'm going to go rapid fire, and you just hit me with them, Katie, as fast as we go. First up, the gesture-based display system. This is one of the coolest things to me about the movie when I first saw it, when I was like, I don't know, when did this come out? 2002, so I was like 14 or something, or 15. I love the way he like conducts the computer to navigate through the interface and through the prediction and stuff. Is there anything like that mentioned in the book or the short story?
No.
Perfect. 1 for 1 now. No. Retinal scanning. Does that take place?
I don't think that this is.
Nope.
No. Okay.
That's what I thought. I was like, that was the only one where I was like, maybe that.
It could have been a little thing that you just didn't notice or something like that. Yeah. But nope. Okay. Automated interconnected supercar highway that runs right into your home. Basically, you pull up from your car, just kind of attaches to your wall, and you crawl right out. Is that in the book, Katie?
No.
Okay. Personalized ads, like they're well, I assume with the retinal scan, I mean they could do it a different way, but in the movie there's when you go into a mall or anywhere public, your eye gets scanned and every ad switches to oh, hi John Anderton, do you need new Gap shoe pants or whatever? So is that anything like that going on in the book?
No.
All right.
I have thoughts on those though for later.
All right. We'll get there a little bit later. I love this, and I forgot about this until rewatching the 6-stick stun batons they have that make you throw up. That is a weird twist on non-lethal weapons.
Very weird. Not in the book.
Not in the book? All right. Nope. That is an interesting, just a stun, like an electric shock. That's not good enough. We want you to violently projectile vomit all over the place.
It's going to stop you.
True. It is true. Still just strange to me. The spider bots. There are little spider bots that they also do retinal scanning, but they run around and look for people in buildings. Any spider bots in the book?
No.
Nope.
Okay.
Just Chuck testing.
Just Chuck test. And the big one, because this is one of my favorite props in all of science fiction. It's up there at least. I don't know. I have a lot of favorite props, but this is one of my favorites. Is the spin to win shockwave shotgun that Anderton uses to. He steals it from a guy who's chasing him and then spins it around like a crazy person and blasts people across the room, and it's super cool.
No.
Oh.
Nope.
And Aaron made an aside comment earlier. This is a very low tech.
Yeah, the universe in the book is a little more low tech than.
Yeah.
Well, okay. And that's really the nature of Philip K. Dick's stories for the most part. There's usually one big change to the technology from what we currently have, and then everything else is kind of schlubby normalcy. So you get the precogs, and that's it, right?
Yeah. That's your give me is the premeditative murder. Gotcha. Okay, well, we'll just spin the wind shotgun. I assumed that again. Most of these to me felt very much like a panel of people sitting, going, "What is the future going to look like in 40 years?" And a lot of it is, and we talked about it in the prequel episode. They did a fairly good job with creating things that turned out to actually be real tech, not too far in the future.
Yeah, so. or close to real tech, anyway.
There's a good range from impressive foresight to ridiculous rule of cool shotgun.
Spin to win shotgun.
I mean, exactly. To me, that's not looking forward. That's looking all the way back to Terminator 2 and going, oh, that was pretty cool.
Yeah. Some of them, definitely just rule of cool. Other ones a little more practical and realistic, but it's a good mix that makes for a fun sci-fi setting. All right, let's move on. This is an interesting one because a lot of times I know when we do short stories, they change. They add a lot of short stories that are adapted. They add a lot of backstory to main characters and that sort of thing that aren't.
Their characters
they flesh them out. In the instance of Minority Report, Anderton, we find out his son was abducted, and we assume murdered. They don't ever really. They just never find him again, basically. And his wife it causes a lot of strife in the relationship, and his wife leaves him, or they separate, and he becomes a drug addict and does cool inhaler drugs. Whatever that's supposed to be, does sweet inhaler drugs. Is any of that going on in the book?
No.
No.
It's all very spirit of Philip K. Dick. He did separate, I believe, from his wife because of drug addiction. It's basically taking pieces of Scanner Darkly and putting it into this for a little bit of plot backstory.
Gotcha.
Which is a great movie short story combo that you should also do. In my opinion, the best Philip K. Dick adaptation.
Really? You think so?
I think in terms of adapting, following the original while also building on it in really good ways.
Cool. I'm aware, though, you're not a big Blade Runner fan. So I would have to...
We're not here for me to lose listeners.
No, it's okay. I get it. I have my own thoughts about Blade Runner. It's a good film, but it's got its downsides.
It's one of the better movies directed by a replicant out there. I'll say that.
It's true. If anybody's a replicant, it's Ridley Scott.
Almost certainly.
Almost certainly. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, because I thought this was kind of an interesting commentary on just society, is that they mention in the film, Burgess says, we have all the statistics about how pre-crime works and that sort of thing, but he's talking to Anderton, he says, you're sort of our beacon of what this represents because you lost someone and, you're so emotionally invested in pre-crime because you've dealt with this loss and because you don't want it to happen again. And he says people will be more inclined to listen to you because you tell them pre-crime works because your commitment is born of pain and not politics. And I was like, yes, we should have the emotionally charged opinion of one man over whatever the data and other sort of thing.
I mean, is that not how it works?
True.
It's a little bit of a hat tip to the discomfort in the story about how this system is maintained and how the hand waving around questions of how do we know that this system isn't locking up a bunch of innocent people?
Yes. Yeah. It's because I feel really happy that all these bad people are. It's I feel strongly that these people should be in jail. So, it's fine. Yeah. This is a line in the film, and I assume there's probably some analog maybe in the short story, maybe not. The line in the movie is, it's better if you don't think of them as human, referring to the precogs. Does the story explore the problematic nature of keeping 3 humans in a drug-induced coma in state of slavery in order to enforce crime that may or may not be a good idea to begin with?
I did not get that element from the short story. I think the story's pretty problematic here because it's made clear that the precogs are people with developmental disabilities.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, well, that is kind of mentioned in the movie because they are the children of people who are drug addicts, I think is what the movie kind of implies, and that somehow that created their abilities. It's interesting. Yeah, potentially problematic.
But to me, I didn't really personally pick up on much of a theme of like exploring whether or not it's okay. Aaron?
Yeah. Aaron, what are your feelings on this?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly wish that they talked about it more in the short story, but I think, from my perspective, it's one of the great pieces of horror that exists within a Philip K. Dick short story. The way that the precogs are described and their existence, and the fact that we know that there are similar rooms like this all over the world in the short story. This isn't a one-off thing that, like... Yeah. It's a really horrifying thing, and the fact that it's not talked about and addressed more, I think, is meant to be an accurate commentary on how little we care about the people that suffer for the benefit of all. So
yeah, that's fair.
That is a good point. Yeah, I like that.
But yeah,
I don't like that. That's awful. But I mean, I like it.
We'll talk about it because we're going to talk at some point about things we like from that one. And we can talk a little more about the difference in the way they're described and stuff. That like I can try to justify that a little bit. I can certainly understand the mindset that, like, you know, I think you absolutely should feel like this is horrifying. Why aren't we talking about this when you're reading it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I would say that it doesn't come up explicitly the way that it does in the movie.
Yeah, because it is at least kind of explicitly remarked upon, and the way the movie ends, which we'll discuss here in a bit, kind of gives you a nice little bow on that storyline.
Yeah, there's no nice bow in the short story.
Bow, yeah. So in the movie, all of the... I have quote unquote killers because obviously none of them actually killed anybody yet, but they are all locked in a sort of eternal comatose state where they like... the movie isn't... I don't know if it's super clear what they're experiencing necessarily, but they are locked in some sort of like, state of like comatose thing, and they're like locked in big tubes. Is that what goes down in the book, or is there a different sort of prison system, or is it just like regular prison or whatever?
In the book, anyone who gets convicted of future crimes is sent to a prison camp.
Oh.
There's also mention of getting sent to frontier planets.
Yes.
Which is very Firefly.
Yeah, but yeah.
Yeah, it's very very Australia.
It's very colonial of them.
So this is something that I really don't like, actually, from the movie. I think that you have an already great, depressing, like, challenging premise with the precogs, and like throwing this super unnecessary punishment hell for these people in, I think, tips the scales and makes it a less interesting debate about how we feel about this whole system.
Right.
So
yeah. I suppose they needed Tom Cruise to be conveniently nearby for the climax.
Yeah, because he gets locked away, and if they sent him to Australia, he wouldn't be able to just come right back and finish wrap the movie up. So this is a big one. Do the precogs predict Anderton killing someone? Because that's kind of the main conflict of the movie. Obviously, is that Anderton becomes a victim of quote-unquote victim of pre-crime.
Yes, that central inciting action is from the short story.
Cool.
We found a connection.
Yeah, we found one. It's finally something other than the main character's name. All right, moving on from there, I have to know, because this is one of my favorite lines, and it's I had to think that we were talking about this had to be the movie that started the Tom Cruise thing, right? Or the running thing. It's got to be this movie. But maybe Mission Impossible, which came out a few years before this. But the "Everybody Runs" line, it absolutely sounds like a movie line, and I'm assuming this is not in the short story.
I don't recall that being in the story anywhere.
And I'm almost certain that the Tom Cruise runs meme existed prior to, because I'm pretty sure what happened was they showed up on set and Tom Cruise was like, "So everybody runs, right? Like, I'm gonna run," and they're like, "Sure, Tom,
sure,
whatever you say, man. Somebody write some chase scenes. Let's go."
Yeah, he's like, "Everybody runs, right?" And they're like,
"No,
we're gonna add that. Yep, that's a great line, Tom. We're gonna add
contract stipulates that everyone runs. There's a jogging program for the whole team every morning."
So let's talk about the title of the story and the movie, which is Minority Report. The short story is The Minority Report. Are the Minority Reports the same thing in the book as they are in the movie? Where in the movie it's one of the precogs has an alternative view of the future, and this is and that if this was known, this would basically undermine the entire pre-crime system, because people would question whether or not, how accurate these precogs are if some of them are predicting different things. Is that the same kind of idea that's going on in the short story?
I got that same kind of basic reading from it. Like, I had the same basic understanding of the system. Aaron, do you want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically yes, but it's vague and kind of messy, I think is sort of the answer. In the short story, he says the idea was, it's like with computers, where when you want to test if a computer has done a computation properly, you weigh it against two other computers. And the idea is, if two computers get the exact same results and one doesn't, you have a good reason to think that two computers wouldn't make the exact same error, and therefore they can be relied upon as accurate, even if there is a minority report. So the 3 precog system is supposed to be based on that same model. Okay. Now, obviously, it doesn't work that way in either case really well, but that's sort of the theory.
Okay. A big fun scene. I love this scene in the movie. Does Tom Cruise get his eyeballs ripped out of his head and replaced with new ones by the dude from Fargo?
I love that guy so much.
Yeah, he's a great bit actor. He only ever shows up playing that kind of character in things, but he's always great.
It's not in the short story.
It's not in the short story. No eyeball replacement. Well, there's no retinal scan, so there would be no need for eyeball replacements.
Peter Stormare. I love him.
Yeah, that's it. Stormare. Yeah. All right, no eyeball replacement. I mean, I guess you could do it cosmetically, even if there's no. Although that seems unnecessary when there are like colored contact lenses.
I really like the spiders too, but yeah,
that whole sequence is great. I think
most of the stuff they added to this was improvements, right? I mean, the thing with short story with Philip K. Dick is you're always going to have to add something, and it's a question of does what you add improve or take away? Mostly it improves.
Is this because this is an interesting idea in the film, and I assume it's probably not in the book, but the Burgess ends up basically, because I mentioned it in the summary of the story, he kills the mother of Agatha, who's one of the precogs, so that she can't take Agatha back, basically. And he does this by hiring somebody to kill her. The precogs see that, they stop it, and then Burgess recreates that exactly and murders her, and this is hidden as an echo, which is like a known bug in the system where the precogs get the same vision of the same crime several times. But in this instance, they think it's an echo of a previous crime, and then he uses that to hide his murder of her, which I thought was a clever idea if it's not in the book. Is that?
Yeah, it's a clever idea, and that part of the plot is not at all in the short story.
Okay.
Yeah. The whole
go ahead.
The whole way that the twist of the minority report system works is completely different. Like, the system is basically the same, but like the reveal of why everything got so messed up is totally different.
The last two things here, big ones. Does pre-crime ultimately fold? In the film, it gets shut down because, like I discussed earlier, the whole issue with Burgess and everything, they shut it down. No more pre-crime.
No, pre-crime lives on.
Oh, all right. That's a big change.
It's bleak, that's for sure.
Well, it's some of the things I think that we'll discuss here shortly, kind of when we get into a bit of the determinism, free will debate type of, that's very much a central theme of this story, is that the movie kind of tends to come down on the side of, yes, free will, whereas the story comes down on the side of no free will. And if that's the case, it makes more sense for pre-crime to fold in the movie, where they're like, yeah, free will you can't actually predict, that sort of thing. Is that your take on it, Aaron? Or
the movie chickens out on the problem with free will because it wants to give everyone a happy ending and tell them that they have a choice.
I know. I agree. You won't get any debate from me. I'm a big. I'm on your side of the debate here, and we'll get into it a little bit. But finally, do the precogs get to live out their days in a Thomas Kincaid painting? And I assume no, based on what we said earlier.
Yeah, that would be a no.
That'd be a big no. Yeah.
Sick burn. Yeah. No. There's no saccharine syrup poured all over the end of that story for some reason. Philip K. Dick doesn't really do happy endings.
Doesn't really do happy endings. Yeah. Well, the movie said things work. Movies like this is a Tom Cruise summer blockbuster. It's gotta have a happy ending. All right, that was it for Was That in the Book. Now we're going to move into our next segment, Lost in Adaptation / Philosophy, because we're kind of going different ways with it this week.
Just show me the way to get out of here, and I'll be on my way.
Where is it lost?
Yes, and I want to get unlost as soon as possible.
Normally, this section is just Lost in Adaptation, and this is where if I'm confused about something in the story or in the film, I'll try to get more background information from you in from the story. In this instance, since a lot of things were added and the short story is shorter, we're going to kind of merge it into like just a general discussion, and we'll kind of branch out a little more into the philosophy here, which is the whole reason we have Aaron on. And we're not going to go super in depth because you should listen to both episodes of Philosophers in Space if you want to deep dive on those topics. But we're going to get into a little bit here and kind of get you a bit of a taste of it. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, and this is we mentioned earlier, but there's a whole sequence where Agatha predicts a ton of trivial events by like hiding behind balloons and things to navigate them through the world without being caught. And we discussed it. So in the short story, they can predict almost everything, including trivial events or just crime-related events, Aaron.
Yeah, so what he says is they predict a bunch of stuff. They just spit out data that they don't understand. Because again, we got to be clear here. Yeah. In the movie, they give the precogs minds and consciousness.
Yes.
In the short story, they have nothing. Their entire brain has atrophied besides the psi part of the brain, essentially, along with most of their body. They're strapped into chairs. They never move. They have no inner worlds, as far as we're told, at least.
Gotcha.
And they just babble into microphones that record the information. And then that information comes out in the form of a bunch of cards, some of which are useful to the police, others of which are like random information about stuff that doesn't relate to them at all that they then trade with other agencies, is what he says.
Gotcha.
So
before we get any further, let's do this, because we're not a philosophy podcast here. A lot of our fans aren't into that sort of, or not that they're not into it, but it's not something, they delve into a lot. I'm a film major. Katie's has 2 English degrees. It's not our world that we live in. So let's because one of the main themes and discussions in this film is sort of the discussion of free will versus determinism. And from a very basic sort of point of view, Aaron, I know it's not an easy,
sure.
But can you give us a little brief kind of a synopsis of what that discussion is and kind of where this movie, where this movie takes that discussion a little bit?
Yeah. So the elevator pitch here is, is a big question about how much we have control over our actions. And we all, I think, like to believe that even though we realize that our actions are in some ways constrained by things beyond our control, we like to think that ultimately something within us has a kind of freedom that allows us to choose to believe one thing versus another, act in one way versus another, and therefore garner credit for our behavior or blame if we do something wrong.
Right.
Where in reality, I think, everything is determined. That the view of determinism is all events are caused by a combination of prior events in a way that is, functionally speaking, necessary, right, beyond our control. And so I think if you look at any of your actions over the course of your life and drill down on the reasons that you did them, eventually you go far enough back, you find things that were beyond your control. And all of that is what makes you. And then how do we cope with that lack of free will is a major question that I often try to wrestle with. And like you said, you're sympathetic to this idea as well. Yes. But a lot of people find that really abhorrent. And so they do not want a world. They would hate the idea of a system that claimed it could, with 100% or even 99% certainty, predict their behavior. We like to think that we are special in a way that doesn't capture, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one of the ways that plays out in the film is with the character of Whitwer, who is, they mentioned several times, a devout Catholic. He always is carrying around, it looks like a rosary, I believe, with him at times. And sort of, I think his need for there to be, he plays sort of the foil to Anderton in that he doesn't buy into pre-crime, at least in kind of at first, doesn't buy into it and says, how do we know we're not locking up innocent people? How can you guarantee that even though your system says they're going to commit a crime in the future, that they actually will? Which Anderton responds with the great rolling the ball across the desk and letting it almost fall. And he goes, how did I know you were? How did you know it was going to hit the floor? That sort of thing. But I thought it was an interesting kind of providing this Catholic, devout Catholic who desperately needs there to be sort of libertarian free will as part of his worldview. Playing the foil to Anderton, who again ultimately kind of still comes down on the side of free will, even though it's a little muddy towards the end, I think, with kind of where his character goes. But I thought that was an interesting concept that I don't know if that's how much that plays out in the book at all or not. But
yeah, well, I was thinking we were chatting about this during the break. it seems like we should explain the way the thing works out in the short story, because it's substantially different enough that like so in the short story what happens is the 3 reports are all minority reports and they're sequential. And the reason they occur that way is because Anderton, is in this unique position of being able to read his own report and thereby create a time loop paradox problem, which is not in the movie. There's a whole separate time paradox that we could talk about, that this is a uncaused cause scenario in the short story. But what happens is, what he figures out is the first minority report was that the military was going to try to stage a coup and he would murder Kaplan in the process of trying to stop them. And then the second report, which said that he wasn't going to murder him, was a report based on him interpreting the information that he saw from the first report. Right. And then the third report is he's figured out that all of this was part of a plan, he thinks, to take over the police force, and then he decides to kill him again. But at no point is it a choice that he makes. He's always being sort of driven, in a sense, by the access to this information. Right. Yeah. So, and at the end, the minority, all the reports are proven correct. So it's not like in the movie where Max von Sydow killing himself proves proves that it's not accurate. Right. Interesting. Yeah, that is a very, very different sort of, and it does, like you said, kind of, since it is all driven by his actions are all driven by previous actions, kind of confirms the idea that, again, with the story kind of coming down more on the deterministic side of the equation. And that, that's how this all adds up. And there's a wonderful exchange at the end where he's explaining it to Witwer as Anderson is packing up to be sent to the frontier because he has murdered someone and now has to go into exile. And he basically says, they're going to keep pre-crime open. And he says, this can only really happen if you look at the reports. So really, this can only be a problem for you personally. Have fun.
Which is one of the things I thought was interesting that the movie does touch on a bit, is that because Anderton sees the future, or sees, quote unquote, sees the future, he actually has the ability to change it, whereas the rest of the murderers don't get to see the events of what the precogs predicted, so they have no means to change it. I thought that was and we kind of just what we touched upon a little bit, but it seems like a very problematic element of the movie in terms of like, so cops, if they ever are going to commit a crime, in the movie world, get the benefit of seeing that they're going to do this and thus changing their action. All of us normal plebs just get to do it regardless of whether or not, like, it's
Yeah, and they sort of hand wave at this, like I said in the short story as well, in a sense that I think that, like, Philip K. Dick, who was pretty anti-establishment in a lot of ways, right, I think was deliberately sort of trying to be critical of the fact that, you know, an alternative to this situation would be you tell people what this information is. And the reason I think they don't do that, they don't really give a perfect reason, like, but I think the best answer would be that it would be more chaotic, right? You wouldn't be able to control the future as effectively if you had all of these weird paradoxes running around where people have been told what they were going to do and that alters their behavior. You get a lot of weird recursive problems. So it's like if you value predictability over freedom, right? If you don't tell people this stuff, if you keep it secret, you can get rid of all the crime, but you are dooming people where some percentage of them might have been able to be rehabilitated and not commit the crime. Yeah. It's a dark story. Yeah. It's so dark.
It is a dark story. Yeah, it's a very dark story. I'm probably I do tend to go back and read most of the sci-fi that I don't read for the show. I go back and read it. This is definitely one I'm going to go back and read. So, but I did want to mention, because I thought this was interesting and I didn't notice this until recently on rewatching, that one of the main visual cues in the precogs vision of Anderton's murder is this old lady smoking a pipe.
Yeah,
and the pipe itself is a very distinct pipe, and I was like, where do I know that pipe from? And it's not the exact one, but there's a pretty famous painting, The Treachery of Images, whatever the French title.
Ce n'est pas une pipe.
Yeah, that one. This is not a pipe. And I thought that was potentially a pretty clever visual cue from them about sort of, and at least in the world of the movie, coming down on the free will side, basically letting us know that it's not this prevision that we're seeing, this sort of the prediction that we're getting is not, because again the movie comes down on this side, is not necessarily the future that will take place. Is not what you're seeing is not necessarily what is true, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a pretty interesting way to code that in visually. I never noticed that before because it is I don't know if I'd never seen that painting before, but anyways, I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, I think you could also interpret that as, I think that's definitely one way that that's going. It's also potentially like pointing to this thing we were just discussing about, this information provided in context could be viewed differently, right? So who is looking at the information, whether it's a painting of a pipe, right? Who then, if you have the concept of the pipe, you see that picture differently, right? Yeah. Same thing with these people being allowed access to this future information. It necessarily, the perception of it changes it, right?
Yeah, it's a good film. It's a pretty good film.
It's definitely on the high end of adaptations of Philip K. Dick short stories.
All right, let's get into our, now it's where we really get to the nitty gritty and compare and contrast better in the book.
You like to read?
Oh, yes. I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything.
We got a few things here from each of you that you preferred from the short story. Katie, I'm going to let you go first, and then we'll get to Aaron's segment, or Aaron's few things that he had, so go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a couple of... but the short story is a little spare. So they changed, as we discussed earlier, the little rolling balls in the movie are what give them the information about the crimes, and in the short story it's cards. And I understand like the visual purpose of that, and that it looks cool and everything. And they say in the movie that it's supposedly then impossible to forge.
Oh yeah, because they have like a laser engraver thing that's like super
but it just seems really impractical. Like wildly impractical. How do they keep records?
They have a giant like an hourglass like in Harry Potter, like where they keep all the gems in the Great Hall.
I don't know. I like to think that they all bring in their old like pickle jars, and they just have jars and jars of these balls.
Sitting around. They dig through them.
Yeah.
Well, what they probably do, and now this is an interesting point that I'm surprised I didn't notice, but I would bet what would make sense to do, and I would be surprised if they didn't do, is when you get to the prison where all the people come out of the floor, that they put those two balls with whoever, like the murderer, quote unquote, that they convicted, they would like store the balls with that person.
I guess, but now you've got like all of your evidence and records in one place, and that also seems like
and Tim Blake Nelson's really busy. Like, I'm not sure he's got a lot of time for messing around with the balls. He's got
that's true. Yeah,
playing the music and stuff. It's important.
Yeah. I thought the idea that in the movie that they could only see murder was a limitation that I felt like didn't.
It was kind of what we discussed. Yeah, it doesn't really necessarily make a lot of sense in the universe.
It was kind of a gimme for the purposes of the film, that I was kind of like, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Like, why exactly would that be a limitation on...
Especially because in the movie, within the world of the movie, it's also not necessarily consistent, like we talked about earlier, with her being able to predict, Agatha being able to predict all these little minute events.
Yeah, she sees like everything that happens when they're in the mall.
Yeah, so it doesn't really make a lot of sense that they would only be able to predict murder. And they do mention in one of the commercials for Pre-Crime, the person says, I was going to get stabbed, I was going to be raped or something like that. And so that apparently, and now maybe both of those also ended in murder, like those, but I was like, so the movie is a little inconsistent on what exactly Pre-Crime does, but generally it was just kind of murders was like the so yeah, I think it does make more sense in the story where it's
right
everything.
Where they just see everything. And I mean, I guess we can all make up our own rules for how that would work, because it doesn't exist. But
well, I don't know about that. I listened to an episode that Aaron was on of a podcast, and that we don't know that doesn't necessarily exist.
That's right.
It's a whole topic for another day, but
I do like the idea. I mean, I agree that it's sort of a cheap trick for plot reasons, but I like the empathy-based model that they do in the movie versus they don't really talk about, other than it being psi power, they don't really get into what's going on with the precogs in the short story. So I like that it they focus on high emotion kinds of crimes. That's a cool image, at least. So. Yeah,
that is a good explanation for it in the film. If you're going to go that direction of only seeing murder, they do kind of explain it by saying, it's murder, these things that are incredibly. They basically like do the like the Harry Potter description of like, you know, it's when you kill somebody, it like tears your soul. So like this is something they can see, kind of thing, quote, you know, kind of that idea behind it. Which is interesting. And you don't like the eye surgery?
I did not like the eye surgery.
It's a great scene.
I was not a fan.
You not like eye based body horror?
You don't like eye body horror?
No.
All right.
We're
not going to watch like most Japanese horror films then.
That's a personal preference thing, I suppose. I love that scene. It's so good.
Yeah, I think I'm a big fan too. All right, Aaron, you had a few things here from the short story that you like.
Yeah, I mean, like I said already, I really do like the sort of Cronenberg style description of the precogs. I think it's very disturbing and sort of exploitative. I don't know. Do you want me to? It's like it's a paragraph long. I could read it if that's sort of thing.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, that's perfect. We do like doing that now.
Okay,
we have a good.
He says, in the gloomy half darkness, the three idiots sat babbling. Every incoherent utterance, every random syllable was analyzed, compared, reassembled in the form of visual symbols, transcribed on conventional punch cards, and ejected into various slots. All day long the idiots babbled, imprisoned in their special high-backed chairs, held in one rigid position by metal bands, bundles of wires, clamps. Their physical needs were taken care of automatically. They had no spiritual needs. Vegetable-like, they muttered and dozed and existed. Their minds were dull, confused, lost in shadow, but not shadow of today. The three gibbering, fumbling creatures with their enlarged heads and their wasted bodies were contemplating the future. The analytical machinery was recording prophecies, and the three precog idiots talked. The machinery carefully listened.
Yeah, that's horrifying. That is truly horrifying. Yeah. What the movie does with them, I understand why they did it, mainly because we get the sort of sappy, happy ending where they're like, fine, and go live on a farm. You know, like your dog that got hit by a car just went to live on a farm. That's kind of the ending we get. But if this was not a Tom Cruise action flick, this movie could have been made a very different way that would have very much played into sort of that side of the horror side, the creepy awfulness side of what's going on here. Would be a different, fun adaptation that I would like to see. So
yeah, it could be a cool. It's an R-rated movie instead of a PG-13 movie.
Yeah,
but most of the greats are. So
yes,
and I, this is another thing. I like the lack of chase scenes in the short story.
Yeah,
that's fair. There are lots of different ways that you can fill time when you are adapting a Philip K. Dick movie, and I think things like the eye scene are the right way to do it, and chase scenes, except for a couple of exceptions in Total Recall, perhaps, doesn't work as well, especially for in the short story. It's all about it being grinding determinism. And so in the movie, it feels like you can action your way out of problems. Whereas in the story, it's like, if you don't think your way out of this, no amount of actioning is going to do anything.
You don't get a spin to win shotgun.
No spin it to win it.
That's unfortunate.
And then, of course, we'll talk about this, I guess. But I like the ending better, obviously. I like the hard determinist ending.
I do as well, and I didn't even read it, but I'm.
And there are ways that you could debate the multiple timeline views that might be going on within a world like this, but in the broader sense of accurately predicting your behavior, I think they go the right direction.
Cool. All right, well, that was what we had for Better in the Book. Now let's talk about the film Better in the Movie.
My life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies.
We got a bunch of things here.
I have a bunch of notes. I'm going to try to condense it a little bit. Because I don't think that there's any reason for me to go through.
And I think one of the things that's interesting. I think one of the things that's interesting here that we're sort of learning as we go is that we're getting a feel for Katie. You're sort of you're a fantasy. You're a fairy tale. That's your realm. That's where you live. That's where you write. That's what you read. And Aaron, very much being a sci-fi. Dystopian, he's into the horror, he's into his podcast. One of his podcasts is called Embrace the Void, and we can definitely see the differences in your two tastes in what
it's the difference between y'all were reading about the different kinds of cyberpunk, whereas I was born to them.
Yes.
My father was a sci-fi special effects nerd, specifically the old claymation stuff. So as soon as it was remotely acceptable for him to show me everything, it was all on the table immediately.
But go ahead, Katie. Let's what is some of the things you like from the movie, boy?
Okay. So I really liked the whole opening demonstration of how the Department of Pre-Crime works.
Okay.
I thought that having them be able to actually watch the predictions, like they're watching a movie, was an interesting element. And for a movie, definitely more interesting than watching the characters read a report.
Punch cards? Yeah, it definitely makes sense to I mean, imagine that sequence with Tom Cruise, except he's just like rifling through a Rolodex of punch cards quickly. It's like not quite the same.
Colin Firth just staring at him.
Yeah, they're all just standing around. He's just like shuffling cards. Yeah.
But I thought it was a good like opening scene, like introduction to like, okay, this is how this universe works.
Right. Yeah. And again, we talk about this a lot on this podcast, but when you're transferring something from a written read format to a visual format, it needs to be visual. Needs to be visual generally. So
I felt like, to me, I felt like the movie had more like kind of intrigue and like stakes.
Yeah.
Like to me, it felt like there was more going on overall.
Well, there's definitely, it would seem like from what we've gathered so far, with the story that plays out with Anderton, and sort of, it's a more, because Anderton can change what happens in the movie, whereas in the story maybe not as much.
Yeah.
So it adds some different stakes to kind of what we're getting.
It was very twisty turny, and I enjoyed that. That kept me interested.
Oh, it's a great sort of thriller mystery if you've never read the story and you don't have any idea where. Like for me, when I first time seeing this and even rewatching it, I had forgotten how it ended. I knew roughly, like I remembered the whole thing with the Burgess killing the mom and that sort of thing, but I couldn't remember in that final scene if Burgess shot Anderton or if he I forgot that he killed himself basically. So it was still, I think it's got some good twists and turns for a film, for like a thriller. It's a good blockbuster thriller.
Yeah.
Like it does that well.
Yeah, totally agree.
Even if it abandons the pretenses of the story, it's another point. But yeah,
even the scene that's clearly lifted from Phantom Menace or whatever it is, right in the factory.
We're gonna talk about that here in a second. I got that in my notes. We're gonna get there very shortly.
Okay, and then I'll have my what's going to be a controversial opinion here with you two is that I like how the movie ended.
Okay,
yes. I like that pre-crime folds.
I don't have a problem with pre-crime folding in the sense that I think morally that's probably a good thing. In the world of the film, the right thing happens, I think. But
I have no stake in the determinism versus free will debate. I have no horse in this race. So I like that there was more of a happy ending. And I like happy endings, and I feel like with the way that the world is, I need a happy ending.
I think that's absolutely fair. There are things that I watch where I want them to have happy endings, and there are things that I watch where I don't want them to have happy endings. Yeah.
And especially because within the world of the movie, we do get to know Agatha, one of the precogs. I think that it would have made a more book-like ending very, very grim and bleak.
Yeah, that's certainly true.
Yeah. And then I think you're wrapped up there, Katie?
Yeah.
All right, Aaron, you had one little note here about some of the stuff you liked in the film.
I mean, I like almost every, besides the change to the ending, I like almost everything they add into, even the chase scenes. Like, it's a little ridiculous, but like the tech is cool, the shotgun is cool, right? The screens are really impressive, the eye scanner stuff is creepily prescient. Like, and much of the stuff that's added is in the spirit of Philip K. Dick, which I really appreciate. So yeah, I mean, I like I don't know if I think you guys talked about this a little bit in the intro, the prequel thing, but the color effect that they do for
I did mention that. Yeah, they ran it, and I have a note. I think I can just talk about it now if I can find it. Yeah, I mentioned that I do love the look of this film. They used it's a special style of film processing. It was some sort of, I got it here, bleach bypass is what it's called, and it basically what gives it that silvery high contrast look. I mean, it works well for the sort of tech noir story that we get in the film. But it's also gives it a very good future noir look because it's all silvery and that high contrast, and you get that weird bloom on a lot of the stuff when there's like high amounts of light. You get that kind of weird light bloom that it's almost it's like a better version of what J.J. Abrams does with lens flares, kind of, like, at times.
Totally.
Like,
No, that's exactly right. It's like lens flare without the lens flare.
Yeah, it's lens flare without the lens flare, but it's a good looking film, as most Spielberg films tend to be. So
yeah, and I mean, say what you will about Tom Cruise, he's a good actor. Like, he's worth watching.
Oh,
he's fun
I agree,
to watch.
absolutely. He's a fantastic actor, I think. I mean, yeah, he has his problems, but he's a great actor.
Watching him chow down on some toxic looking food is super fun.
Yeah,
would recommend.
All right, that was it for Better in the Book. We're going to hit a few more odds and ends, then we'll do our final verdict, and then we'll wrap this thing up. But we have a few notes here that we want to discuss just kind of while we were watching the film and talk about those.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you thought that potentially the flying police were a reference to Fahrenheit 451.
Police, is that a reference to Fahrenheit 451? I want to know.
Probably.
Because that's my favorite part of the Fahrenheit 451 movie.
I've never seen
shitty, like, they're like action figures on strings.
I've never seen that
flying
one, so.
Police jetpacks. I don't remember if they're in the book, honestly, because I haven't read the book since high school.
Yeah.
But I remember watching, it's like a 1960s adaptation of it. I remember watching it in school and I lost my goddamn mind.
Well, I think this movie does a really good job of illustrating how unpractical jetpacks are as a means of, of mobility. Like, even in this movie in 2002, they still look completely goofy and like Anderton just outruns an entire pack of people on jetpacks, by like climbing around on monkey bars and stuff. Like, it's
Tom Cruise. He's the best at running.
It's true. He is the best at running. But
Katie, I think we have an answer to your question, actually. It appears that in Fahrenheit 451, in the book, there's a thing called a beetle, which is a car that hovers above the ground and moves very quickly.
Oh.
Yes.
So, yeah.
So similar.
Yeah.
There you go.
That is in this. It is in the book. You were curious about whether it was in the book. I thought not just.
Yeah.
Okay. So could be totally a reference.
I think one of the other things that I thought was funny at the beginning of the movie. We're just jumping around here at these notes. Sure. Feel free to jump in whenever aired. I just thought it was a little funny thing at the beginning is that wife is terrible at having an affair. Like,
she really is the worst at it.
you could not wait more than 30 seconds. And no, I'm not saying I'm a professional at having an affair or anything. I'm just saying you could not wait more than 30 seconds after your husband leaves for that man to come in and start fucking you. Like, he's literally, if he forgot his keys, like, you're screwed. Yeah. Like, which is what happens, isn't it?
If you're gonna hide something like that, you can't be sloppy.
Yeah.
Maybe it's that, like, pre-crime has made everyone really lazy at doing immoral things. Yeah. Like, just seeped into the consciousness.
That could be it. It's just so strange to me. I'm like, man, you're really bad. Like, he's standing right outside their door watching the guy walk back into the house from behind a tree.
I'm like, she didn't even really wait for him to leave.
Well, and the guy is standing across the street in the park staring at their house before. Like, he's just standing. And the guy, even the husband's like, who's that guy? I feel like I've seen him before.
And, if I was having an affair and my husband noticed the guy standing outside and, like, said something about it to me, I'd be like, abort. Yeah, right? Don't come in today.
This is another interesting difference between the story and the movie is that in the movie it's like a pilot program and they're testing to see if it works.
Yeah.
In the short story it's been going for 50 years and, like, he says that most people have never seen a murder. Like, so I just feel like that feels a little more plausible in a sense that, like, if you had if you're living in DC, right, and you're in the middle of a test program, like, I feel like you're really, really not gonna murder somebody.
Yeah.
The deterrent effect would be really in place at that point.
It would be very high, yes. It would be very high.
Okay, I've got a couple things
because
I want to hear y'all's thoughts on this. We get the distinction in the movie of crimes of passion versus premeditated crimes.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is then, like, how much pre-crime does it take to get you arrested? Like, if you're driving and someone cuts you off and for a brief moment of anger you imagine running them off the road, are you arrested for that? How premeditated does your premeditated murder have to be?
you would have to go to carry it out. I think it's like they would know.
But you never do.
Well, but I see what you're saying. Like, especially with the crimes of passion, that could be a problem. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
I mean, from the precog's perspective, there's no difference, right? Because
there's no difference.
It's just crimes that would be actualized and crimes that won't be actualized.
Yeah,
and then you get the weird sort of, for the sake of the movie stuff about like certain crimes because of the way that they are actualized, because you're not sitting there thinking about it ahead of time or something. It doesn't become as obvious as early. But I think I think the idea would be like, you know, if I'm going to kill you a week from now and I'm thinking about it right now, and the precogs can see a week in advance, then they can see up to the point where I start thinking about killing you in a way that's going to come true, or something, I guess.
Yeah. But I guess I see your point, Katie. In the movie universe, where there is this distinction, and the crimes of passion are born and they're seen mere minutes out.
Yeah,
there's a potential problem with whether or not they're actually
whether or not I'm actually going to carry that out, or if I'm just angry, and then the next 10 seconds later I'm going to be like, never mind, I'm over it.
Yeah, I guess the argument would be that they are seeing that you would in fact carry that out, as opposed to just the 10 seconds where you think you would want to do that.
I feel like this is real weebly wobbly.
Well, I mean, I agree that is the case. Obviously, you've got a huge problem for confirmation versus false positives. We talked about this a little bit on our show about like, well, maybe you could do a study where you just let all the crimes happen for 5 years while having the precogs predict them and see how many of the predictions are accurate.
That's a perfect test case. I feel like they must that seems like you would have to do that.
Doesn't really come up in either of the versions.
Ethical.
No.
It seems like you would have to do that in order for this to be remotely ethical. You wouldn't just like jump right in on it. But
Philip K. Dick was not a really big falsificationist kind of guy.
Yeah. So I feel like the scene at the beginning when the guy has the affair and he's going to kill his wife and her lover or whatever. We talked about the Tom Cruise running, but. And they land from their jetpacks, and Tom Cruise realizes which house it is, by realizing the door's open or whatever. And I love that for no reason whatsoever, other than for us, the viewer, to be absolutely certain that is Tom Cruise sprinting across the street. He knocks his space helmet off and like sprints across the street. And I guess it's because that helmet would really ruin his running form, and Tom Cruise does have impeccable running form. Yeah. But I just thought it was really interesting that he feels the need to knock that helmet off to run across the street.
I mean, as someone else who's also only 5'5", there is a peak aerodynamic point, and if you go up to 5'6", you're just not going to cut it.
It's true. They are kind of bulbous, and they would definitely add some wind resistance that you didn't need if you're trying to get there to stop a murder. So.
Yep.
And speaking of the running, I love that this movie has a scene, the one scene we get of sort of the connection between Tom Cruise's character and his son, that is, the movie set as sort of the moral backbone of the moral setup for like Tom Cruise's attachment to pre-crime and all that sort of thing, is him teaching his son how to run. It's the proper form to run. It's like, are they in on it? Is Tom Cruise in on this joke? He must be.
That's what we were watching the movie, and I asked you, I was like, is this... that meme?
No, it was. I think Aaron's right that it was before this, though. Well, I mean, like Mission Impossible, and
I feel like it was before this, but this one really secured that brand.
Yes.
Like, because like that and the line about everyone runs, like it really running is a theme of this.
Yeah. Yeah, it leans into it hard.
And there is none of that in the like the old man in the short story is like, I am not a runner.
Yeah, Anderton, as described in the short story, not much of a sprinter, it sounds like. So.
Can I point out something super weird? I don't know if folks will notice this when they watch the movie. And this is not in the short story, but Tom Cruise calls Colin Farrell's character a twink in like the first scene.
Does he?
Yes.
He does?
Yeah. Just go back and check this out if you didn't notice it. But he says some sort of crack about not being replaced by a twink or something. It's I checked it a couple times.
Does that mean the same thing then that it means?
As far as I can tell.
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't find anything about why that is in there. But it's like, that's there. That's a line in the movie
it's
that
not
happened.
In the short story or
anything.
So.
Yeah,
weird.
I don't think they had that word back in the short story.
I didn't catch that.
Yeah, no, it's
I didn't catch
super
it either.
strange. It's in a point where like he's clearly meaning to say like this young, effeminate guy who can't do the hard work properly, but like instead of desk jockey, you get twink.
Yeah.
Weird.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 2002. Movies did things like that,
but it's like
a little more often.
On the flip side, though, it's 2002. Who watching Minority Report would understand that word and the reference that was being made? That I didn't know that word. Like, I think 95% of people don't even hear the word go by when they watch that scene.
Yeah.
It's so weird.
Well, to be fair, I didn't even notice it. I mean, I know the word, and my experience with it is more to do with World of Warcraft than the other definition of it. But yeah, that's one little shot that I love in this film. There's a lot. It's a gorgeously shot film, but there's two particular shots I wanted to mention. One is that there's a moment where Anderton's on the bus while he's on the run, and you get this close-up shot of the guy, or not close-up, but kind of a medium close-up of the guy staring at his newspaper across the way, and then a person walks up in front of the camera, and when the guy clears the camera, now suddenly the guy is staring at him because he has seen the wanted poster or wanted story in the newspaper or whatever. I think it's very effective. It's very paranoia inducing, and it immediately gets your heart rate going in the same way that Anderton in this moment would be feeling. I think it's a very effective little 3 seconds of filmmaking that I haven't seen it in a lot of films, but I think it's done really well in this one.
Yeah, definitely. I like something that they do sort of keep from the short story is that the Colin Farrell character Whitwer ends up being a decent cop. It's a nice twist. I really like. I mean, this is all totally added, but the part where they get to the scene where he was supposed to kill the guy and he accidentally ends up killing him in the movie. The guy who is being framed as kidnapping his son. He talked about the orgy of evidence thing. I think that's some pretty good added dialogue. I feel like. Yeah.
It is. I do love that twist because it feels very cliche. It feels the setup for it with the sort of the back and forth, the tete-a-tete between Whitwer and Anderton feels sort of cliche, and you're like, oh, he's going to end up, because Anderton thinks he's setting him up or somehow involved. And I like that subversion of that because it is, at least at the time, it felt very unexpected and kind of fresh, and that he is just a good cop kind of going through and making sure that this does actually work. He is just invested in making sure that sort of, he's got kind of a by the rule of the book, letter of the law kind of guy, and he's seeing it all the way through. And I think that's kind of an interesting subversion of what you would expect from the way his character is set up. I like that a lot in the movie. And I also love his death scene because it's completely unexpected, and they give you no... it just happens. He gets shot. You don't see Burgess pull the gun. You see him get the gun at the beginning of the scene, but you don't see him pull the gun. You don't see him thinking about pulling the gun. It's just a gunshot, and then he's dead, and you're like, oh, well, shit.
This was the first time I had ever seen this movie.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know that happened. And my notes literally say, Colin Farrell's character is very smart. Oh, well, there he goes.
Yeah, Max von Sydow is a stone-cold gangster. Turns out.
Yes, he is. Speaking of Star Wars, I gotta mention this scene because it is almost shot for shot from Attack of the Clones, and they came out. So I looked this up because I've forgotten this scene was in the movie. The where he gets the car manufactured around him. Anderton's in a car factory plant, and in my opinion, this is the stupidest part of the movie. It's the least.
It's a pretty big gimme.
Yeah, he's a warehouse of a plant that builds cars, and he's on the construction line basically, and there's the same sequence in Attack of the Clones where Anakin and Padme are on a droid in the droid factory, and there's droids getting built around them, and they even have almost the exact same scene where his arm falls on the conveyor belt and a big metal thing comes down over it around it, and then it's exactly the same thing. I'm like, were the same people working? How did you get this identical of scenes in two movies that came out the exact same year? They had to be talking to each other or something. Somebody stole notes from, or Minority Report had actual precogs working on their film crew, and they saw the plot of Attack of the Clones, because it is crazy how similar it is.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. I mean, everyone was stealing from everyone at this point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of stealing stuff too, another comparison that I was thinking of when I was looking at the rereading the short story. This is written in 56, Minority Report. Dune is 65 or so. Let's see. We'll double check that. 65. you could draw, I think, a comparison between the way the precogs are described here and the way that the third stage guild navigators are described in Dune as these sort of mutated, highly advanced. It's the same concept of like, you know, all of the energy goes into this new power and the old body kind of withers and changes in weird ways. So it's just interesting to see that there's all these different themes in all of these sci-fis, and one of them is the enhancement of the biological in various ways to do things, especially in concert with technology.
And it's also really stupid in both movies, particularly this one, where he gets the car built around him. And then I love the comical, like, Colin Farrell fist punch afterwards, where he's like, "Oh, I'm going to get you, you jerk." Like, it's pretty cheesy.
But that's the scene with your precious spin to win shotgun.
It is. So I like that part of it. I just don't like the car being built around.
It's that one specific set piece that bothers you. I understand.
Yeah, and I get that the gun's kind of silly too, but I like
Speaking
it.
Of
like
silly,
I said, I saw this movie when I was 14, and it was in my wheelhouse of like cool space guns. Man, all right, I'm on board.
Yeah, y'all are
like it.
You do YouTube stuff as well, right? So you've got some video editing skills. I think you should absolutely take all of the scenes involving jetpacks and people on them, and set them to yakety sax, because there's some really great, hilarious like jump on people and they fly in weird directions.
There really are, yeah. And if you sped it up about 10%, where they get that comical, like, overcranked, like Buster Keaton style
I would watch that.
Movement to him. Yeah, be good. Something else, Katie.
I had some questions about the eye recognition advertisements.
Okay, go ahead.
Does everyone hear their own name? Or, is the sound in their heads, or are the ads just announcing your full name to everyone in the vicinity? If several people go by, how does the ad decide whose name to say?
It's interesting.
Like, if there's a crowd of people, I don't want advertisements to announce my full name to everyone in the room.
You could get those.
I assume.
As I say, you get the hyper-targeted speaker systems.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like a thing where, they can directly focus, like, the sound to just your ears based on where your eyes are, probably, would be, like, the sort of advanced technology that this universe would have. Something like that would be the case. And now there's no mention of, they don't have like eye augments in this movie or anything. They don't have like sort of retinal implants or anything that would be, at least I don't think they do. Because that would be another potential explanation, is that it's not actually projected in the world, but that he's seeing it like just on his retinal. But I don't think that's ever set up in this movie. No. They're just normalized that,
I think it's...
Could you avoid the eye ads by wearing sunglasses?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely meant to. It does a good job expanding the overall theme of like trading of personal freedom for greater functionality. Like, if you're comfortable living in a state where the people can arrest you for pre-crime, you're probably not going to complain too much about some corporate micro-targeting.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, absolutely. The Gap ads are the least of their worries in this universe. So
it's the moving of the Overton window, basically.
Oh, and then one other thing I wanted to mention was that one, I love the line where she's talking, and I assume this character is completely added, the botanist lady who's in the movie. It was an interesting little diversion that I completely forgot was in the film, where he goes and visits. The
lady from Harry
Ivy's
Potter,
in this movie.
right?
I was about to say Professor Sprout.
Professor Sprout,
he goes
exactly.
And And she's got venomous tentaculia and everything going on. And but I love, she asks like which of the precogs is the most talented, and she's like, well, it's obviously the woman. This
is Lois Smith, who's wonderful in this role. Super funny.
Yeah, she's really good. Yeah, it's a great scene too. Yeah. But yeah, obviously the female. And then lastly, I knew I recognized Agatha from somewhere, and it was driving me crazy. Now, she's a very well-known actress. She won like 2 Oscars right around this time. But the thing I know her from, because I never saw the 2 movies she was won for or whatever, it's Samantha Morton is the actress who plays Agatha. And we've been watching Harlots on Hulu. Which is a great period piece about a brothel brothels plural in 18th century
Histoporn.
17th.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is.
Oh, it's amazing.
It's fantastic though. It's a great show. Liv Tyler was in the most recent season. It's really, really good. It's on Hulu. It's called Harlots. But yeah, and she's one of the main characters. And that was like, so it's like driving me crazy because this is now 20 years removed almost from.
Yeah. And I didn't recognize her until you said that. Then I couldn't unsee
I know, yeah. Yeah, she's like the mother of some of the main characters in the show, and is a really fun, powerful character in that show. But
the show is a lot of commentary on issues that are still.
Yes, it's about a lot of sexual power dynamics and sort of the same,
And it's cool to them in that they add that stuff in with the movie. Like in the short story, there is none of that like Agatha is special, the woman is better stuff.
Yeah,
and like while I do love the creepiness of the precogs in the short story, I like if they're gonna give them agency that it ends up being a female who's given a lot of agency and control in the situation. So that part's cool.
I think that's a good ad.
Yeah. Well, I had one last thing that I wanted to say. We talked earlier about how they accurately predicted some tech.
Yes,
with this movie, at least kind of, sort of,
and some of it was in development at the time. But
one thing I noticed that the movie gets super wrong about the future is the continued existence of shopping malls.
It's very true.
That's a sick burn.
That's true. It's very true because that shopping mall is full to the brim of people, and they cannot close fast enough currently. So
they did not predict Amazon correctly.
Yeah, they missed out on Amazon. That was the big feature tech that they
could have had delivery robots and all kinds.
Oh yeah,
of
where
things.
there was no, there weren't any drones in this. Oh, I mean the spider drones they run around, but there was drones would have been a big one.
How many of you would sign up for Amazon Prime if it were just a precog system that deducts from your account and sends you things you're going to want?
It basically does that already. You just have to click a button. Yeah, you just have to click a button saying, yes, you read my mind correctly.
Yep.
I don't know if their algorithm is that great. Usually they recommend me different versions of things You've already
purchased. It's like, I already have that. I don't need another one.
Yeah.
I'm not a mattress aficionado or something.
Yeah. I don't need 8 headboards for my bed. But okay. It's time now for the final verdict.
Now, are you ready for your sentence?
Sentence? But there must be a verdict first.
Sentence first, verdict afterward.
Katie, you can go first. Which is better, the movie or the book?
For me, I preferred the movie.
Okay.
I thought that kind of exploring it through the morality of whether or not we should be doing this with the precogs and like giving them agency was a little more interesting.
Yeah. You liked that aspect of it. Yeah. Cool.
Text
Katie
traitor.
comes down on the side of the movie. Aaron, what do you think?
I do love the short story and tend to prefer it for all the reasons that we've talked about. But I mean, I think, like I also said, I think this is one of the best Philip K. Dick adaptations out there. Certainly one of the first you should try watching.
Yeah, it's very digestible. That's for sure. It's a comparative. If I was going to say, hey, go watch a Philip K. Dick adapted film, I wouldn't point people towards Blade Runner first unless I knew they had drank a bunch of coffee beforehand. Because boy, you might fall asleep. It's possible. So, all right, that was the final verdict. We got a split, which is that's good. That's probably fair. Yeah. That's probably a good way. Which is actually how this has gone so far with the show. We're 41 episodes in now. And it's about split if you don't count Harry Potter.
It's not actually a split, though, because Katie's more right than I am because she's the woman. So she has the power, and my minority report can be ignored.
Obviously, the female.
Yeah. Has the better taste.
One of the things I wanted to mention before we go is that we have Dune on our list one day. And I know we may have to try to get you back for that one because, boy, that is a whole can of worms.
It sounds like an undertaking.
Yes, and I don't know anybody who's more of a scholar on the series, at least from what it sounds like, than Mr. Aaron Rabi.
Yeah, the guy who does the Ice and Fire videos, he's pretty good. But
okay,
I would be happy to. Or A Scanner Darkly is a slightly more manageable project if you're looking for another.
That would definitely be more manageable. I think you did 3 episodes on Dune in your podcast.
We did 3.
Yes, 3 episodes. And Thomas, his co-host, loved every second of it. It's his favorite 3 episodes.
He's gonna be so mad when the Villanueva movies come out.
Oh, I can't wait for that one. Oh, Denny's one of my favorite directors working right now, and I'm excited. Once again, go ahead, Aaron, plug your stuff before we go here.
Yeah, you can find Embrace the Void and Philosophers in Space on all the major podcasting arenas. You can find me on Twitter at ETVPod, where I will be saying absurd things and picking fights with anti-social justice warriors, mostly.
Woo! Go get them.
It's fun times.
Awesome. Well, that's it for the 41st episode of This Film is Lit. So until next time, guys, gals, non-binary, and everybody else,
keep reading books,
keep watching movies, and keep being awesome.